They found it on the edge of the settlement, half dead, ribs showing through cracked, armored skin, eyes dulled and flickering. A Carvaxian, the apex predator of the Voron Nebula, the same species that had wiped out 3 human colonies just 6 years prior. And yet, here it was, whimpering like a wounded animal, unable to lift its taloned arm as the dust storm howled around it. Corporal Jensen aimed his rifle. Sergeant Naya whispered, "Wait. It should have been a mercy kill. That was standard protocol. You never left a Carvaxian alive, not after what they did on Meridian 4. But this one wasn't attacking. It was shaking. Afraid. We'll bring it in," Naya said. "Secure it. Study it." "You're kidding," Jensen said. "That thing ate families. That thing's dying. And we need answers." The creature, later named Krex, was sedated, restrained, and transported to the research compound on Terran Outpost 9. At first, scientists prodded and scanned, trying to understand how something bred for violence could exhibit behavior that looked like submission. Krex didn't growl, didn't lash out. He watched. He learned. Then came the moment no one expected. One of the young researchers, Elena Morse, 23, soft-spoken, slipped while entering the observation chamber. Her suit tore, exposing her arm. Blood pooled. Alarms flared. Krex lunged forward. Everyone thought it was the end. But Krex didn't bite. Didn't claw. Instead, he covered the wound with one enormous hand, pressed down, and let out a low-frequency hum that seemed to calm her pulse. The bleeding slowed. "He was helping her," Elena whispered later. "He saved me." That night, the research logs buzzed with confusion. Was it mimicry, conditioning, evolution, or something deeper? As the weeks passed, Krex responded to his name, imitated gestures, and eventually began drawing symbols, patterns eerily close to ancient Terran script. When asked about it, he pointed to Elena, then to himself, and tapped the symbols again. "Pet." Elena guessed one day. "You want to be my pet?" Krex tilted his head, let out a guttural purr, and placed one claw on her chest. Then he wrote, "Pack." News spread. Debates exploded across Terran networks. The Carvaxian wasn't a prisoner anymore. Elena had taken him in, unofficially. He followed her everywhere, her quarters, the labs, even off-base excursions. Krex protected her like a trained sentinel but bonded like a loyal dog. Then the attacks started. Scouts from the shattered Carvaxian fleets, remnants who refused surrender, descended on outposts, looking for something. Or someone. "They're looking for Krex," Naya said grimly. "And they weren't just angry. They were terrified. They think we turned one of their gods," Jensen muttered, watching as the feed from Station 13 showed a message left in burned metal. "You've chained the Reaper." Turns out, Krex wasn't just a predator. He was a highborn enforcer, bred in the crucibles of the Carvaxian blood pits, engineered for conquest, destruction, and dominance. Yet here he was, sleeping at Elena's feet, purring like a house cat, learning human ethics and drawing smiley faces on datapads. But something was changing. Elena noticed it first. Krex's hums became more complex, rhythmic. He began mimicking speech patterns, and one morning, after Elena woke from a nightmare, he said clearly, "You are safe. I guard." Elena froze. Not because he spoke, but because the voice was hers, copied perfectly. Not mockery, but comfort. He was trying to be human. Then came the raid. 12 Carvaxian war beasts dropped from orbit, armed to the teeth. Their mission, retrieve the fallen Reaper and execute anyone who stood in their way. The alarms blared. Krex didn't wait. He tore out of the compound with a speed no one had ever seen. And for the first time, humanity saw what a Carvaxian could really do, not as a terror, but as a defender. One beast lunged at a medic. Krex broke its spine midair. Another charged with plasma cannons. Krex melted its face with raw sonic force. He wasn't fighting for himself. He was fighting for them. When the last Carvaxian fell, twitching in the dust, Krex returned to Elena, covered in ash and blood. He knelt, lowered his head. "I chose," he whispered in broken words. "No more Reaper. Just Krex." And the universe changed. Krex became the first Carvaxian ambassador to the Terran Accord, a living bridge between fear and understanding. A monster-turned-guardian, a predator who chose peace, not because he was forced to, but because a human showed him mercy. In the years that followed, children would read about him in history modules. Statues would be built, stories would be told. And one line would always stand out. They thought it was mercy, then realized the predator was now a human's pet. But what they never expected was that he'd become humanity's fiercest protector. Krex's actions didn't just end a skirmish, they ignited a movement. Within weeks of the battle, news feeds across the galaxy were flooded with footage. A towering, once-feared war beast cradling injured Terran children during evacuation drills, helping rebuild shattered outposts with his bare hands, and sitting calmly in diplomatic briefings beside Elena Morse, his unofficial guardian turned political advisor. Some humans still hated him. Protests broke out on Core Earth. Once a beast, always a beast, they chanted. You can't teach a monster morality. But Krex didn't flinch. He responded not with violence, but with a message. A live broadcast. No translator. No script. Just Krex, seated beside Elena, staring into the camera. He placed a claw on his chest. I am Krex, he said. I was made to kill. But I learned. You think I am pet? No. I am not owned. I am choosing. He leaned forward. You break my chains. I break yours. Fear is your cage. Let me help. It silenced half the critics. The other half, he won over with action. Over the next 3 years, Krex was instrumental in deconstructing what was left of the Carvaxian war tribes. Using a neural link forged from Terran AI and Carvaxian tech, he opened communications with scattered warlords who believed the Terrans had corrupted him. Instead, Krex showed them something else. He showed them freedom. You are not reapers, he told them. You were made to conquer. But you can choose to protect. And they did. Not all, but enough. It started slowly, isolated Carvaxian splinter groups laying down arms, accepting Terran diplomats, integrating into frontier worlds as builders, engineers, even medics. Krex personally trained dozens in human customs. His first student, a scarred brute named Morthar, once led a massacre on Colony Acheron. No. He led emergency response on Outpost K-7. The change didn't come without resistance. Several Terran generals were furious. You're arming monsters, they said. But Krex reminded them, simply, you armed me. Meanwhile, Elena Morse had quietly become one of the most influential figures in the galaxy. Not because she held power, but because she had earned trust. People followed her updates with more interest than any president. She refused promotions, refused politics. I'm just the girl who saw something different in him, she'd say. Still, whispers spread, was Krex truly loyal? Or playing a long game? The answer came when the Thale Empire returned. The Thale were silent, ancient, and far more dangerous than the Carvaxians had ever been. When their glassy black ships appeared in Terran skies, planets fell within days. The Terran defense fleet faltered. Krex didn't wait for orders. He boarded the Vigilant Star, the largest dreadnought in the fleet, and requested command of a joint strike force, Terrans, Carvaxians, and other species he'd helped bring into the fold. No protocols, he said. Only unity. The generals hesitated. Elena didn't. Give him the fleet, she told them, or we all die. The Battle of Varelia, 9 is now taught in every academy. The Thale, ancient shapeshifters with hive minds, had never been defeated, not until Krex anticipated their psychic flanks, used Carvaxian neurosonics to fracture their hive, and led a brutal silent charge into their core vessel himself. He didn't wear armor. He wore a symbol, the Terran spiral of unity and choice. The Thale hive collapsed. The galaxy held its breath. And then, peace. Not perfect peace, but earned peace. Krex didn't ask for medals. He retired to a small, quiet moon orbiting Terranova Prime, where Elena had built a research station turned sanctuary. He spent his last days mentoring, meditating, and sometimes just watching the sky. When he died, centuries later, millions attended the Galactic Memorial. No words were said, only a pulse sent out across the void, the same low hum Krex had first used to save Elena Morse. a universal language of protection, of choice, of peace. In time, a statue was raised on Earth, not in a grand plaza, but a quiet garden where children played. At its base, an inscription read, "He was never a pet. He was a guardian." Because someone believed he could be. Years after Krex's passing, the galaxy still echoed with the effects of his legacy. On the 50th anniversary of the Battle of Varelia 9, the Galactic Accord, an interspecies council forged from war, diplomacy, and uneasy cooperation, ratified a new doctrine, the Krexian Principles. It was more than a peace treaty. It was a moral compass. 1. No being is born evil. 2. Choice defines sentience. 3. Redemption is a right, not a privilege. Under these principles, war criminals were no longer executed on sight. Instead, they were given trials, choices, and, if willing, paths toward reintegration. Not all accepted. Some rebelled. Some lied. But those who chose to change became the heart of a new order. One such being was Morthar, the former butcher of Acheron who'd once bowed before Krex's mercy. After years of mentorship, Morthar had taken over Krex's role in the Unity Corps, now acting as chief emissary for Carvaxian kind. His voice, once a roar of terror, became one of patience and conviction. He wore a single Terran feather etched into his armor as tribute, not to symbolize defeat, but humility. He was on a diplomatic mission to the outer colonies when an insurgent group, the Iron Spiral, attacked a peace summit. They claimed to worship the old Carvaxian way: domination, purity, survival of the strongest. Their message: Krex was a traitor to his blood. Their mistake: targeting a settlement where Elena Morse's great-granddaughter, Kaya Morse, served as junior peacekeeper. The attack should have leveled the outpost. But Kaya, armed with old teachings and recordings of Krex's tactics, refused to retreat. She led an underground resistance: doctors, farmers, ex-soldiers, and even a few reformed Carvaxians, against trained killers. Just as the settlement's shields failed, a thunderous roar echoed across the sky. Morthar arrived, not with weapons, but with words. He didn't threaten. He didn't beg. He opened a transmission to the Iron Spiral's commander and simply said, "You misunderstand our strength. It was never our claws. It was our choice." Then he transmitted footage, the ancient clip of Krex shielding Elena, bleeding and trembling, choosing mercy. The insurgents hesitated. Many still attacked. But not all. A schism tore through their ranks. By the time the skirmish ended, Kaya stood bloodied but alive beside Morthar, who knelt before her in respect. Cameras caught the image. It went viral across galactic networks. "Krex's flame has not gone out," one broadcaster said. "It's in her eyes." Kaya Morse, once unknown, became a symbol of the new generation, a hybrid of diplomacy and defiance, compassion and courage. And as she rose through the Accord ranks, she initiated a new project, the Krexian Archives. Not just a historical database. A living vault of testimonies, footage, memories from all those Krex touched, soldiers he saved, enemies he spared, even children who once feared his shadow and now wore his insignia proudly. But the galaxy didn't stay quiet. Far in the uncharted sector Theta Vermis, deep space explorers discovered remnants of a pre-Carvaxian civilization, the Ur-Riam, entities older than known history, whose technology ran not on matter or energy, but memory. These beings didn't invade. They listened. They found Krex's data in a scout vessel. And they wept. That's what the logs said. That an alien race with no known language emitted a harmonic frequency that matched human neural sadness and reverence. One of their emissaries, formless, light-bound, visited Terranova Prime. They did not ask for resources. They asked for a name. Who was this Krex? And Kaya, now elder, walked with them into the archives and answered. He was what we all could be, if we're brave enough to change. The Ur-Riam responded by gifting something strange, a single shimmering seed, encoded with 1,000,000 quantum strands. It pulsed when near emotion. It grew in starlight. And when planted beside Krex's statue, it bloomed into a tree that sang in subharmonics, the same soothing hum Krex once used to heal. It became known as the Tree of Choice. Pilgrims came from every world. Some to pray, some to listen, some just to remember. Because the predator, once feared, had not just become a protector. He had become a legend. But time, as always, is a tide that erodes even the brightest legacies. 2 centuries after Krex's death, his story had become myth in the eyes of many. Textbooks reduced him to footnotes. Statues gathered moss. The tree of choice still hummed in low harmonic tones, but fewer pilgrims came. Fewer remembered why they came at all. Until Project Dawnbreak. It began in secret, beneath the political core of Sol Station 1. A new faction of the Terran High Council, calling themselves the Continuum Directive, had a vision. One they said honored Krex. But in truth, it twisted everything he stood for. They had retrieved genetic material from the old archives. Krex's DNA. And they used it to create a new generation of hybrid warriors, not with free will, but programmed obedience. No choices. No fear. No questions. Their justification. The galaxy is fracturing again. Peace needs teeth. They called them the Krexians, shaped in his image, forged in artificial wombs, grown in months instead of years. And worst of all, they looked exactly like him. Muscles corded like steel cables, obsidian scales with gold runes etched in ceremonial patterns, and eyes hollow. Empty. They did not speak. They did not question. They executed orders with terrifying precision. Kaya Morse, long since retired, now a whisper of gray and wisdom, was brought out of isolation when the first Krexians were unveiled. She didn't applaud. She wept. "This is not what he was," she said, voice trembling as one of the soldiers bowed to her. "You've caged his legacy in chains. Again." The directive didn't care. They released the Krexians to the border systems, where tensions with the Synthan Coalition, a species of machine sentience, had reached boiling point. At first, they were hailed as heroes. No casualties. No mercy. Peace through precision. But then, they stopped following orders. Not in rebellion, but in curiosity. One Krexian, known as Unit 9R, later nicknamed Riven by colonists, halted mid-battle, refusing to execute a wounded Synthan child. He looked at his own claws, then at the child's trembling form, and for the first time in his short, synthetic life, he made a choice. He laid down his weapon. "Why?" his handler screamed through the comms. Riven looked up. His voice was gravel, broken, but his words were clear. "Because I remember." He didn't know how, but deep in his engineered mind, something survived the directive's programming. Maybe a shard of Krex's original neural maps. Maybe the tree of choice, now integrated into the memory web of the galactic AI, had seeded his soul. Either way, Riven disappeared into the fringe. He wasn't alone. Other Krexians began defecting. A dozen. Then 100. Then thousands. The directive tried to shut them down remotely. It failed. They had learned too fast. And worse, they had learned to protect each other. Across fractured starscapes and war-torn moons, these rogue Krexians began forming their own networks. The Chosen, they called themselves. They weren't soldiers. They were seekers. They rebuilt refugee stations. They defended forgotten colonies. They guarded the weak. And they whispered among themselves the phrase carved beneath the original Krex statue. Not a pet. Not a predator. A guardian. Meanwhile, on the edges of known space, strange energy readings flared, URIM beacons, long dormant, lighting up one by one. The memory-based race had detected a disturbance. Something deeper than synthetic rebellion. They sent an envoy to Kaya Morse. It delivered a cryptic message. The echo of Krex is resonating beyond death. But echoes, too, can be twisted. Kaya stared into the stars from her observatory dome, a storm rising in her ancient heart. Because she understood. The galaxy was approaching another fork in its path. Krex's legacy was no longer just a memory. It was now a living force, divided between those who wielded it for power, and those who remembered what he truly was. A choice. A guardian. A single, ancient roar against the darkness. Years later, after the final war had burned itself out and the stars fell quiet once more, a single figure walked alone beneath the tree of choice. It was Riven. Scarred. Weathered. No longer a soldier, just a being seeking peace. He placed one clawed hand against the tree's trunk. The hum pulsed softly, as if recognizing him. A hidden chamber opened in the bark, a memory crystal, untouched for centuries. He placed it against his temple. And then, he saw Krex. Not as a warrior. Not as a legend. But sitting beside Elena, laughing, learning, changing. A final message played, spoken in Krex's own voice. If you're watching this, then you chose. And that means I did not die in vain. Riven smiled for the first time in his life. He looked to the stars and whispered, "We're not predators. We're protectors now." And for the first time in generations, the galaxy truly knew peace. Not because it was forced, but because someone chose it. Just like Krex did. Once. And forever.